Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're taking a look at the legendary motherboard that is the B450 Gaming Pro Carbon Max Wi-Fi from MSI. I'm really excited about this one. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we're taking a look at MSI's B450 Gaming Pro Carbon Max Wi-Fi. I'm not sure if they could have fitted any more words into that description, but I'm sure they'll probably have a go in future releases. This board, I should say straight away, this is a used board. Now I've actually picked this up from one of our Discord members, Marshmallow Cookie, so thank you very much for the trade which we actually did. So I've actually traded this for a vacuum. So I'm extremely pleased in that regard because this is much better at computing than a vacuum, although not quite as good at picking up dust. As such, with it being a used board, then there are some little bits and pieces which aren't quite what you'd see in the retail release of this. The backplate was missing the AM4 mountings, but not the end of the world because we'll probably use a custom cooler on it. Also, our M.2 cooler was actually missing as well, so there's no shield on there. Not a problem though, because our good friend of the channel, Patrick LaBelle, actually sent us over a addressable RGB M.2 cooler, so we'll be putting that on this board at some point also. Things we have had included though, obviously the board itself, got bunch of SATA cables. We've also got the oh so important I/O shield because it isn't a captive one. This is actually really handy because it tells you exactly what is what on the back of the board, which ports do what, speeds, etc, etc. So yeah, very good to have that. Also, Wi-Fi antenna, which is also very handy for picking up Wi-Fi reception rather than sticking a coat hanger in the back. And also we get our user manual, which, although not entirely necessary, is a nice thing to have for reference purposes. And indeed, for reference purposes, you may well need it. Being that this is a B450 motherboard, it is slightly long in the tooth right now. And the original B450 Gaming Pro Carbon Wi-Fi came out somewhere in the region about 4 to 5 years ago, depending obviously when you're watching this video. This is currently November 2022. So yeah, it's had a little bit of a history. This was a revised version, which came out towards the, I think it was towards the middle of 2020. I'm not entirely sure exactly when. I do remember though when it did come out and eBuyer were selling it for something along the lines of about £80 on a reduced offer. I really wanted one, but for some reason I just missed out. And since then they've been a little bit elusive and they've actually gone up in price considerably. So to be able to swap this one for a vacuum, I'm very happy indeed. So you're probably asking, what is the difference between this and the original version? Well, there's actually a few things which they've increased. The Max version generally across the range for MSI products signified a inclusion of a BIOS which is ready for Ryzen 3000 series processors. So back in the day when we went from the 2000 series to the 3000 series, there were a lot of motherboards which didn't come with a BIOS, so you had to flash them, etc, etc. Now they've also added in extra features. So we do have a BIOS flashback button, which is also very handy for doing BIOS flashes. You've got an increased VRM as well. So we've gone from a kind of standard 4+2 setup in the previous version, maybe a 5+2, I'm not entirely sure, my memory doesn't serve me that well. But this particular version now has a kind of, well, they call it a 12+2, but it's more like a 10+1 or something. So effectively what they've done is taken the original VRM, they've added doublers, and then basically just added extra chokes for each phase. So yeah, they've increased the VRM. It's not quite as spectacular as you'd first think, but it certainly is a welcome improvement. So if you are planning on using this board with like a Ryzen 9 3900 or maybe even a 5900, then the VRM is going to be able to cope with that pretty easily. This, in my opinion, is probably the best B450 board that was ever made. And certainly if you are looking back with a little bit of nostalgia and you're thinking you want to build a system but you want to use a B450, what board to choose, this has got to be definitely up in the top choices. So let's go through, take a quick tour of the board, and then we'll come back at the end with some more of my final thoughts. So in the top corner, we've got the EPS connections, something which was slightly unusual and generally only was seen on the X470 range of boards rather than the B450s, is the fact we've got the additional power phase available for processors. Again, along with that beefed up VRM, that does allow you to plug in an extra 4-pin connector. So you've got your standard 8-pin or 4+4, but you can use an extra 4 if you want to. Also in this top area, there is a LED, which is for the BIOS flashback button, which some of you have probably been watching eagle-eyed to see if your BIOS flash is actually completed or not, so that is up in that corner. Also what we've got is a really good VRM cooler, actually pretty weighty. The combined weight of the two VRM heatsinks is somewhere in the region of about 260 grams, so decent bit of weight there. Again, back in the B450 days, heatsinks weren't really that elaborate. you're lucky if you've got a chunk of metal, whereas these actually quite a nice design, and following with the Pro Carbon moniker, they have got a carbon fiber effect, especially on this section here and also on the one lower down on the chipset. So moving along, we've got our CPU fan header at the top here. All of the fan headers on this board are going to be the same sort of deal, so they're PWM, they will work with voltage DC, or alternatively you can use them as a pump header should you wish to, in the oh so wonderful MSI center, said slightly tongue-in-cheek. Moving down, we've got our CPU socket, so this is obviously AM4 socket. This is going to support basically kind of pretty much every single processor on the market. It comes out from AM4. Some of the older Athlon series and A series processors you might struggle with depending on which BIOS version you're on. If you go with the very latest version of the BIOS, which is a beta, then you can always use the 5000 series processors should you wish to, and it will support up to the latest and greatest, the 5950X, the 5800X3D, those kinds of processors. So even if you bought this board back in the day when it came out and you were thinking going forward what is going to be coming out, this is still a rock solid platform even now. Moving across, we've got our RAM slot. So RAM supported speeds up to 4133 megahertz, or mega transfers, however you want to look at it. So you've got 4 slots there, dual channel, supporting up to 128 gigabytes of RAM. In the top corner, we've got our J Corsair connector. So that is an adapter for connecting up some Corsair peripherals. Next to that, there is a pump fan header. So again, 4-pin PWM, can be set to 3-pin VDC should you need to. Underneath that, there is another fan header, so that is fan header 4, which gives you an idea of how many fan headers there actually are. Underneath that, this is again something else which you are probably going to be looking at eagle-eyed at some point, alongside with your flashing LED for the BIOS flash. This is your diagnostic D-LED. This is something which it should be standard on all motherboards, it really should. So this has got 4 LEDs telling you what is the problem or what is the process of your booting. So the first one's CPU, then you've got RAM, then you've got VGA, and then you've got boot. So if you get stuck on any one of those, it kind of points in the direction of what your problem is with your system or what needs attention. Under that, we've got our standard 24-pin power connector, no surprises there. And underneath that, we've got another fan header, so that is fan header number 3. Moving across slightly, we've got our M.2 slot. So this is PCI Express Gen 3. This slot here is powered from the CPU itself, so depending on what CPU you put on here, your limitations may vary on this. It will only support NVMe drives, no SATA M.2 drives at all. And also, if you are using this top slot, because of the limitations of the B450 chipset, if you put an M.2 drive in this particular slot, then you do lose 2 of the slots from your SATA section. So that is going to be SATA 5 and SATA 6, which are directly connected to the processor socket. So again, whichever one you use, one eliminates the other. Moving across slightly more from that, so there is another fan header. So if you're using a fan at the back of your system, then nice and easy to plug in over there. Moving down, we've got our PCI Express Gen 3 x16 slot for your graphics cards. So PCI Express Gen 3, you are going to be able to put Gen 4 cards in there. Obviously, do be aware of some limitations. Some of the Gen 4 x 4 cards, obviously bandwidth-wise, you may find issues, but realistically, I think most people will probably be fine. If you're using a very, very modern graphics card, you may find a very slight performance hit, but it's at the most going to be somewhere in the region of about 10%. Moving across, we've got our MSI carbon fiber looking heatsink here over the B450 chipset. This is actually illuminated as well, so we do have illumination around the outside edge of that, which is controllable in MSI Center, etc. There is actually some LEDs along this top side as well, which also are controllable in that center, although if you set it to a specific color, you can't do one here and one here. They're kind of tied together, so do bear that in mind. SATA ports there, so we've got 6 SATA ports in total. Obviously, like I said, if you're using M.2 in that top slot, 2 of those ports will be disabled, or if you plug in a SATA port there, that port will be disabled, etc, etc. You get the general idea. Moving down, we have got all of our connectivity for your front panel I/O and all that kind of stuff. So we've got your front panel connection and FP2, so that is options for a speaker, your power switch, reset switch, all that kind of usual stuff. Next, that is the most important one for me, which is the 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB. Something which was sadly lacking on pretty much all B450 boards, other than a few notable exceptions, such as ASRock's B450 Pro 4 and Steel Legend, I think it was. Some of the Gigabytes did as well, I think, possibly the Auroras. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, it was a very novel thing to see on B450 chipset motherboards. Just above that, we've got our JBOT, so that is for resetting the CMOS, which is actually really handy because the CMOS battery is underneath your GPU slot. So if you do dial in some overclock settings and the system just won't post, then rather than having to kind of take out your graphics card, remove the BIOS battery, you can just short out the connection down the bottom there. Being how close it is actually to your front panel connectors, some people who were into overclocking back in the day would have normally taken the reset switch button rather than connecting it to the front panel connection, would have set it to the CMOS reset. So you can use the reset button on your case just to do a quick CMOS reset. Moving along, so we've got our USB 3.0 front panel header. Then you've got a couple of USB 2 headers for connecting up front panel connections. Moving across, we've got a J-Power LED. I'm not entirely sure what that is particularly for. Maybe if you know, let me know in the comments section. Underneath that, we've got our JT1 and also we've got our TPM. So JT1 is a Thunderbolt connection if you want to connect up the Thunderbolt port as a discrete unit. And also for TPM, you can use a discrete TPM if you don't use the built-in in the processor. Next up, we've got a COM port. And there's a JCI1, which is a chassis intrusion port. So if you have that sort of thing on your case, then you can connect that up there. Moving along, there is another chassis fan header, and we've got a standard 12 volt RGB port. At the very end, we've got our front panel audio connection for the HD audio, which is actually on here, actually pretty decent. So we're using Realtek's ALC 1200 chipset, which is supporting 8 channels, 7.1 surround, all that kind of good stuff. Moving up, you can see we've got a little bit of a heatsink cover over the top of the audio chip, and also you've got your high quality capacitors surrounding that. Moving back across, so PCI Express Gen 2 ports, so we've got a ×1 there, ×1. Also you've got a 16 times slot, but only wired for ×4. So that is only 4 pins in there, not the full stretch. So you can use this in kind of like a SLI or crossfire mode if you wanted to. Realistically, I think probably most people will be adding in things like maybe a USB-C port, that sort of thing, or maybe a faster Ethernet port should you need to. That is PCI Express Gen 2 all down through those 4 slots. There is also another M.2 slot at the bottom here, which is this one. So this again is going to be coming from your chipset rather than the processor. That is only going to be PCI Express Gen 3 ×2, and it does actually support SATA M.2 drives and also NVMe drives. Again, no heatsink on there, but if you want to add one, you obviously can do. Moving around to the back, so this is actually some pretty decent I/O in here. The only thing which lets it down, I think, is the same as lets it down on a lot of MSI boards and I guess other manufacturers as well, is the limited amount of USB ports. So we do have our BIOS flashback button here in this top corner. Again, very handy to have. Will probably save you if you buy a slightly older board and you buy a brand new processor and it isn't supported. Nice and easy to do that flash in. We've done thousands of videos on that. If you want to check out those, we'll try and link some in the video description below. We will be doing actually a BIOS tour on this board and also a demonstration on how to flash the BIOS, as we do with most boards. So if you want to see how that goes, obviously stay subscribed. USB ports there, USB 2.0, 2 of those, and you've also got a PS2 port. The bottom of the USB ports is actually for your BIOS flashback. Moving along, so if you're using a APU or a processor with integrated graphics, you can make use of the DisplayPort, so DisplayPort 1.4. You've also got HDMI 2.0B, both of which are going to support 4K 60 Hz. You've then got your Wi-Fi, so that's Wi-Fi 5, so that's using the Intel AC9260 chipset, I believe. So that's AC Wi-Fi. Nice little chip, and actually you can remove that as well, so it is on a E key. So if you want to, you can undo 2 screws on the bottom and replace that with a Wi-Fi 6 module, should you want to. Next up, we've got our Ethernet. So this is actually nice, decent Ethernet supplied by Intel. So that is their i211AT chipset. So that's gigabit Ethernet, 10100, etc. Underneath that, you've got your USB 3.0 ports. So that is going to be super speed ports, so 5 gigabits per second. And next up, you've got your USB Type A and Type C, both with USB Gen 3.2. So that is going to be 10 gigabits per second. Next up, we've got a full complement of audio outputs. So you've got 5 jacks there, and also you've got your SpeedIF as well for optical out should you want to use it. So there we go, there is a tour of the board, all the features, etc. I've got to be honest with you, I really do like this board. I know it's pretty sad to actually have some sort of emotional attachment to a motherboard, but I think this was pretty much the peak of what MSI did for the B450 range. All their boards were pretty decent. Things like the Pro A, Tomahawk Max, those are extremely popular, and even still to this day. And even so, a lot of you are probably out there watching this thinking, why are you doing a review or an unboxing of a B450 motherboard? And there's actually a really good reason for it. They are still super popular. Now, possibly not so much here in the UK and in the States, but in some other regions, these are like rocking horse stuff. You cannot get them for love nor money because they are so darn popular. And for that, there is going to be a market for it, for the videos, maybe not specifically in my region, but in other regions around the world. This is going to be invaluable information for you. So there we go. That is going to wrap things up. Not a perfect board, but hell, it's pretty damn close to it. But what I think about it isn't important. What you think about it is. So let us know your comments in the comment section below. What you think of the MSI B450 Pro Carbon Gaming Pro Carbon Wi-Fi Max. That's just a ridiculous name, isn't it? Anyway, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.